welcome to the first episode of Flyweight Diaries, where we'll be looking at all the flyweight news, all the flyweight reviews, and flyweight previews over the coming weeks. It'll be a weekly show, and we'll be looking at not just the flyweight division, we'll also be looking at the minimum weight or strawweight division, whichever you prefer to call it. We'll also delve into a little bit of the bantamweight division. We know these fighters are constantly moving up through the weight division, so once they do move up to the bantamweight division, we won't suddenly forget about them and stop talking about these guys. We'll still give them a little bit of coverage, but for the simplicity of the title, we're going to call it the Flyweight Diaries. But just to let you know, we will be talking about the other weight divisions in and around that flyweight category. It's just basically to give a bit of insight into a bit of limelight on these smaller weight classes that are so easily ignored by the mainstream media and mainstream platforms. But thanks to obviously more streaming services now and obviously access to so many fights through YouTube, we're able to watch some of the top fighters and some of the most exciting fights on the planet right now. So there's plenty to get into because, as once again this weekend we were spoilt with two great fights in the lighter divisions, one of them taking place in the strawweight division, and that's the fight we'll be looking at first, because Melvin Jersusalem followed up his victory over Shigeoka to repeat the success, and repeated it in far more convincing fashion this time around, defending the WBC minimum weight title against his Japanese opponent. This took place on Sunday night, and it was a fantastic fight, and it was massive credit to who now should be named Marvellous Melvin, because he was just fantastic. He's put his game plan together. He took lessons himself from the first fight and really put him into production on Sunday and got a much deserved victory, which really solidifies his place as arguably the best fighter in the minimum weight division. So probably the biggest headline from this was the fact that Shigeoka really and truthfully just did not learn from his mistakes. He didn't learn from the first fight, and he certainly didn't learn to adapt during the fight. It was Shigeoka's inability to adapt. Whether that comes down to him being such a young fighter, in age he's 27, and in years gone by you'd have always considered that very old for a fighter in these lighter weight classes. Not so much now. We're getting a lot of fighters in their 30s coming into their prime. A lot of fighters fighting late into their 30s. We've seen that recently with just one example, Nonito Donaire, who fought well into his 30s at the highest level, even dropping back down from the featherweight classes to the bantamweight division, where he'd really made a name for himself and became so successful as a pound-for-pound start. And obviously Melvin Jersusalem, you see 31 years old, and it just feels like he's into his prime now, because this was a far better performance from him compared to the first outing. I remember in my preview I thought that Shigeoka would learn from the first fight. I thought he would be more aggressive. I thought he would push the pace a little bit more, and my question marks over Jersusalem was the fact that he wasn't going to be able to go with that pace. Shigeoka definitely did up the pace, and Jersusalem did go with him, which was impressive, but it was the way Shigeoka upped the pace. He didn't up the pace with better head movement. He may have stepped in a little bit quicker, stayed in range more than he did in the first fight, but ultimately he just kept getting caught over and over again with the right hand. For the first 4 rounds, it was just on repeat. It was just one punch. The headline was Jersusalem dominates fight with one hand. and that seemed to be how it was going. It was one punch over and over again, and all that was flashing in my head as I was watching it was Shigeoka's just not learning. He's not adapting, and he's not learned from the first fight, and in fact he's actually regressed in this second fight. It's like he's just repeating the same mistake every time. He started to come back into it, nicked a few rounds in the middle portion, started to make it more of a firefight, and suddenly the fight changed. It became less of a one-sided, domination, not quite a beatdown. It wasn't like Shigeoka was taking hellish punishment, but it was one-sided. It started to become a little bit of a trade-off between them. Jersusalem would land, Shigeoka would come in with a hook, but suddenly it just fell back into that pattern. And while Shigeoka was successful, did have his moments as the fight went on, again, probably the last 4 or 5 rounds, it just felt like Melvin Jersusalem took it to another level. Always seemed to have the last word, which was super key in this fight, especially fighting once again away from home. And he just dominated down the stretch. He made sure of the fight. It was open scoring, and I think you can see by the scorecards 119, 109, 116, 112, and 118, 110. I think he was up very, very convincingly after 8 rounds when the open scoring was revealed. It was at such a point where I think Shigeoka needed to win every round just to get a draw. So to claim the belt, he did need a knockdown at that point. And you could see almost a hint of desperation, but at the same time a hint of resignation from him. Almost as if he started taking more punches at that point. In those middle rounds, he started to use head movement a little bit and started to up the pace and was moving his head quite nicely. Just see about my scorecard, so how I had it 118, 110 to Jersusalem, and as you can see, that 5th and 6th round is where I felt like Shigeoka may have been turning the tide, and after that 6th round especially, it was like, okay, this could become a very interesting fight if Shigeoka has changed now and he has adapted. It suddenly thought like, okay, he's learned his lesson, but Jersusalem just upped it again from the 7th round onwards and really never looked back. For me, had them 2 streaks, winning the first 4 rounds, sweeping them, and for me swept the second half of the fight, which was quite impressive to see for a fighter who the pressure was on him to sort of prove that the first fight was no fluke. So this was a great victory for Jersusalem. Really happy for him, really coming into his own now at this stage of his career, and we're hoping that there'll be unification fights in the near future for him. There's plenty of options in the minimum weight division, and there may be the move up in weight, but Philippines seem to have really got a good fighter here. He adapted so well. He's got another good victory on the road, as he's done so much in his career. And at this stage of his career, it's almost like he's finding his rhythm now. We already know he's lost to Oscar Collazo, so maybe not looking at that as being a fight. Obviously Collazo will be looking, obviously moving up in weight, will be looking at making more of an impact in the light flyweight division. But maybe a clash with Pedro Taduran, his fellow countryman. Taduran, really good fighter. Another deceiving record, much like Jersusalem himself. And also they got one thing in common, and that's the fact that Taduran has a victory in his last fight against the other Shigeoka brother, Ginjiro, and that was for the IBF title. He won that, hasn't fought since then, since he beat the other Shigeoka brother. But that is certainly a possibility. That would be a fantastic fight for the Filipino fight fans, to get them two in the ring fighting and unifying the division. And there's a couple others as well that you could see in there, maybe former champions like Ginjiro Shigeoka maybe as a fight. Knockout CP Fresh Smart is always an interesting one. Maybe Alex Winwood as well, fighter from down under. Plenty of options in this division, and hopefully we'll see him out again soon. And there's obviously plenty of other Japanese fighters as well to pick from. So moving on to the slightly higher weight class of the flyweight division, and that's where Masamichi Yabuki became world champion in yet another weight division. And as you can see by the scorecards there, he was in complete control at the time of the stoppage in the 12th round. I went out on a bit of a limb by saying that Angel Ayala could be a really good fighter, and there's still potential for him to do that. He's only 24 years old. It's the first defeat of his career. There's no shame in that. Fighters like Yabuki will definitely tell him that. Look at his defeats, 4 defeats, and there's some knockouts in there, some quite vicious knockouts actually. No shame in losing to someone like this, and there's always a chance of him bouncing back convincingly and still being a good fighter at this in this weight classes. But he was totally outclassed. He looked out of his depth early on. I've got a taste of it when I think in the middle rounds when Yabuki suffered a cut under his right eye. Quite a severe cut. I think if anyone's seen the photos of the after, when them standing together, the blood all over the canvas, both their trunks covered in blood. That also had something to do with the suspected broken nose that Ayala suffered not too long after. And it seemed like he may have had a chance to get into the fight then, but Yabuki was sensational. He cut that off straight away, kept hurting Ayala, he had the power advantage despite being the one coming up in weight. And Angel Ayala just never really was able to settle into a rhythm, and ultimately was second best throughout and was stopped in the final round. See my scorecard a little bit closer than what the judges had. I give a bit of credit to Ayala in a couple of the rounds, a bit scattered, but you can see by the rounds he was winning on my scorecard, the 4th, the 7th, the 10th. There was never anything that he put together. He never put a sequence of rounds together, and obviously you can see the first 2 rounds how badly it literally couldn't have gone any worse. It was not quite Juan Manuel Marquez, Manny Pacquiao sort of bad start, getting dropped 3 times in the first round, but it's not much worse, being dropped 3 times in the first round means it's a 10-6 round. You're 4 points down after 1 round. He lost 2 rounds 10-8, which means he was 4 rounds down after 2 rounds. Instead, it wasn't much better, and it was finally stopped in the last round. Shame he couldn't saw it out to the final bell. I think he showed enough toughness to warrant that, but at the point it was stopped, he was in trouble and he was taking severe punishment. And I guess it's always better safe than sorry in boxing, and they can't blame the referee, but I think it really made the right call. It was just a shame that Ayala couldn't see it out. Plenty of options now for Yabuki. What he does, he's got the option potentially to go back down in weight, but I suspect he'll stay in the flyweight division now. Certainly at this stage of his career, he's going to look at cashing in and with some big fights. And hey, maybe we'll see the trilogy. It's seems all set up, doesn't it, now, for a rubber match between Yabuki and Kenshiro Teraji. They have 1 win apiece. Obviously, we know that Teraji's victory was really decisive, stopping him in 3 rounds, while as Yabuki, obviously, it was a late stoppage, it was a grind, it was a competitive fight, but he was winning the fight. Many people feel that Teraji put things right in the rematch, but maybe Yabuki since then coming back, beating Notshinga, and now dominating and stopping Angel Ayala. So those are 2 wins in a row where he's dominated the fight and stopped his opponent late. So I think there's more than enough reason to say that these 2 Japanese fighters can get it on again. Unification fight, I think it'd be perfect, and hopefully it's one we'll see this year. Maybe one of those spectacles at the end of the year over New Year, like you see so often in Japan. I'd be all for seeing that trilogy. I think it's one that would be a crying shame if we don't get it and it never happens. Point out, we always like to look at the up and coming fighters in the flyweight divisions. Inoue Yokoyama seems to be a name that's going to be talked about quite a lot, I think, in the next few years. I think he's going to be mixing in world championships within the next couple of years. He's obviously only turned pro in the second half of last year, but 3 fights down already. Guillermo Negramo was the fighter who beat the other night. This was on the undercard of Yabuki's victory over Ayala, and it was a 12-rounder, so already getting the rounds in, went the full distance. Negramo has been in there with other high-level fighters, has a good record on paper, and was always going to offer a stern test, and he come through with flying colours. So when we see these cards, we always try to look down the undercard and see what talent's coming through, and Yokoyama looks like one that might be worth keeping an eye on. So you might see him on some shows with the likes of Inoue, Nakatani, Teraji in the future. Not fighting those guys, of course, not yet anyway, and not anytime soon, but certainly featuring on their undercards and likely taking that step up in class and put himself in the running with the other, young Japanese fighters that are making waves and trying to be part of that next generation that takes over in the flyweight classes. So mentioning Inoue and Nakatani again, like I said, they're not actually flyweights, but we'll still mention these guys anyway. They deserve our mention. They've been great champions in the flyweight divisions before, and they're only just a division or 2 above, so why not give them a bit of love. They were honoured recently. Both fantastic fighters. You can't deny these 2 guys on everyone's pound for pound top 10 list, and Inoue right at the top end. For me, Nakatani's creeping higher and higher with every fight he's in. They're the most sensational fighters in these lighter classes, and they're going to reign supreme for many years to come. So yeah, as you can see, they've teased the potential 2026 super fight. There was a little mention between them that about them dealing with their own business this year. Inoue has everything lined up for the next 6 months, and they teased the potential of this happening next year. Nakatani was in complete agreement, saying he would love to do that, and it's a fight they want to give to the fans, and we're all for it as well. I think the whole boxing world would be up for this fight. 2 of the best fighters on the planet, not just in their weight divisions, but pound for pound as well. It would be a fantastic fight. It feels in many ways like Nakatani is following the blueprint that has been set by Inoue in these lighter weight classes. That slow grinding through the divisions, the power, the exciting style, the breaking into that American market, which is also always so key in boxing. And it's just a fantastic fight that we would absolutely love to see. There's obviously other fights we'd love to see both of these guys in there with. Everyone's sort of desperate to see Inoue potentially move into that featherweight class, which is so wide open because it's so full of talent. It's, got a guy who's already beaten in Stephen Fulton Jr., but you've also got Nick Ball, Rafael Espinoza, and Angel Leo. Some great fights, and something we'd obviously love to see Inoue a part of. Nakatani right now in the bantamweight division. I think the potential of that fight with another fighter we mentioned today, Teraji, what a fantastic scrap that would be. Teraji, another fighter that I believe is creeping in on the top 10 pound for pound right now. I think he's a sensational fighter. So plenty of great fights, and obviously I think the big one right now for Nakatani from for most fighters would be that potential Jesse Bam Rodriguez fight. What an absolute classic that would be. And obviously the fact that Bam Rodriguez has that American market, being a San Antonio fighter, it would be great for boxing. But this one would be the super fight. This is what Turki Al-Sheikh is in boxing for, to make these fights happen and to make sure these guys who have been so undervalued for so long get the paychecks that they deserve. So here's to 2026, where we could see the lighterweight version of Bivol Beterbiev, basically the two best fighters in those lighter classes fighting each other in what would be a fight for the ages, and one that would go down in the history books for those lighter weight classes. So switching on, a little bit more news here, which involving probably two generations, two different generations of the lighter weight classes, of the flyweight weight classes. Galal Yafai, who obviously represents the new blood coming through, and obviously creates the interest in the UK market. Fantastic amateur was Galal, following in the footsteps of his brothers Cal and Gamal, and he's looking like he's got a great future ahead of him. He beat a Sonny Edwards, who obviously, seeing his comments in the ring during the fight and his performance in all, shouldn't have been in the ring, and had to be saved from himself basically in that contest. But Galal could only beat what was in front of him, and what was in front of him was a former world champion, was a fantastic fighter who had befuddled so many good fighters before him, and Galal did his job fantastically. Meanwhile, Francisco Rodriguez is a name from the past. He's mixed in there in the previous generation of flyweights, which was so dominated by Mexicans, and obviously one very famous Nicaraguan by the name of Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Rodriguez mixed in with some of them. Check his fights out on YouTube. He was in nothing but classics. He was always the guy on the outside of those fighters. He always came up short, but he was involved in more, and he was involved in exciting fights every time he was in the ring. Still going, which actually sort of surprised me. I saw this headline and I saw the fact that he was going to purse bids on March 25th. As you can see, Matchroom have won that, so it's likely this fight will be staged in the UK, or there's obviously still a possibility it could be in one of the Rehab season cards, because obviously they're targeting it for June and July, and obviously we know there's going to be a few shows out there in Saudi Arabia at that point in time. So it's it's just a fantastic fight, fantastic step up for Yafai. I think it's the right step up. I think obviously he fought a former champion in Edwards, but obviously a severely handicapped Edwards who just wasn't in the right mental state, even if he was physically okay to be in there. He just wasn't in the right headspace, unfortunately. Francisco Rodriguez, he bridges that gap here for Yafai. Rodriguez isn't at that level anymore. You're not going to see him getting in the ring with a Teraji or a Yabuki. That's not going to happen. But he bridges that gap to set up those fights, potentially with Teraji, Yakubi, Bam Rodriguez, for the next sort of 12 to 18 months of Galal's career. So it's a perfect fight for him. Someone who's been there with the previous generation and has still got enough left, and is a very prideful fighter who will give absolutely everything to give anybody a challenge, just like any great Mexican fighters in these lighter divisions. So a fantastic fight, and one I think we should be looking forward to for everyone, watching the development of Galal Yafai and seeing how far he can go and what waves he can make in the flyweight divisions. So there isn't much action in the flyweight divisions this weekend. Probably one of note is out in Las Vegas on a Top Rank show, which features some really good prospects like Ricardo Torres Jr., Abdullah Mason, and also has a fantastic fight between Lindolfo Delgado against Elvis Rodriguez. Should be a classic. I'm really looking forward to that one. And one to look out for is Steven Navarro. There's a little video as well on Top Rank's YouTube page, which are a bit behind the scenes with Navarro. He's a super flyweight from the USA. He's 5-0, fighting Juan Esteban Garcia, the Mexican fighter. So this should be a good test for Navarro. It'll be interesting to see how far he can go in his career. And obviously he joins a couple of other American-based fighters in the flyweight divisions, like Anthony Olasquega and Oscar Collazo. Oscar Collazo now really putting himself into the pound-for-pound discussion, and Olasquega, who's already been fighting some of the top fighters in these flyweight divisions. Steven Navarro should be comfortable at going to 6-0, and it'll be nice to see how he's progressing. Just 21 years old, plenty of years ahead of him, but we'll see how quickly his progression goes from here. And obviously he's got one of the best promoters to work his career with Top Rank, and I'm sure this will be another fighter that will hopefully put the flyweights on the map. So keep an eye on him on the undercard this weekend in Las Vegas. So that's it for episode 1 of Flyweight Diaries. So there'll be plenty more action and news to bring you next week.